Well, Delian, it's such a great pleasure to meet you, especially 2 days after the election results are here. How do you feel?
Pretty good week. It's tactically exciting to see that obviously like a sort of true sort of mandate was given, and the past 4 years, especially sort of relative to like 2020 or 2016 election, I spent a lot of time in Washington D.C. partially because I started a company that has to be regulated by a lot of parts of the government, and so I've come to sort of learn the downsides of the deep state, the downsides of sort of regulatory bureaucracy slowing down innovation, the upside of when you have a Republican sort of controlled Congress, and so it's really exciting to see already some of the sort of early messaging coming out of sort of all parties. My probably sort of favorite example is um, Elon is not particularly happy with the FAA, as people can probably guess. They tried to slow down a lot of the Starship launches for pretty sort of BS reasons. There's been a lot of FOIA requests over the past couple of weeks, seeing how insane sort of the internal slowdown that they've had there around like figuring out whether or not like sea turtles in like the Gulf of Mexico are affected by the sonic booms of sort of rockets. It's like, dear God, if we cede the like surface of the moon to China because of like sea turtles in the Gulf of Mexico, like Jesus fuck Christ, like they're dropping second stage rockets on population centers. We don't have to go to like that level of extreme. But anyways, yeah, it's like really, really, really exciting to see across all aspects of it. Just like the legislation that's going to be able to be passed, the amount
Deregulation.
The amount of deregulation that you'll be seeing, obviously, sort of relevant to sort of the community here. It's just like, yeah, I could not sort of be happier.
So Delian is not only a partner at Founders Fund, one of the leading venture capital firms in the US, but he also is a co-founder and president of Varda Space Industries, which is building the world's first space factories. And I think it would relate to many of you here, this company of Delian that he launched, because yesterday Hernando de Soto introduced this necessity of property rights to minerals to be owned by people, to bring property rights to the next level so that the civilization of the future to be built on the property rights, not just land and real estate as we know today, the modern civilization, but actually further. And now you're giving this opportunity to think even bigger, the property rights in space. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in any sort of domain, whoever has the sort of largest operations and is the first there gets to define the rule of law. In theory, you have this sort of international sort of space treaty that was signed at this point sort of 50 years ago, and it is just nonstop violated by our adversaries, right? Like one of the sort of parts about the Geneva Convention as well as the International Space Treaty is that there will not be any weapons in space. Well, the Russians have shot ASAT tests, so anti-satellite tests, and they've done this now basically every 5 years for the past 40 years straight. It's literally just missiles that go into space and blow up satellites. That is a weapon in space. The Chinese demonstrated in the summer of 2021 a boost glide hypersonic vehicle, which is effectively a space missile. It's a missile that goes up to orbit, then comes back from orbit, and we see boosts and glides on the way down. So in that sort of first test flight, they actually shot the missile from China, circumnavigated the entire globe, and then navigated basically back to China, basically obviously showing that they had a space missile now that could basically sort of launch anywhere they wanted in the world, because rather than going down in China, if they wanted to go down in America, just extend the orbit and come down a little bit sort of later. So you obviously have the sort of Chinese doing that. And then you have the North Koreans, they've clearly, sort of hinted at the fact that they have deployed a small satellite above the United States that orbits above us, sort of once every hour and a half, that is clearly capable of deploying a nuclear weapon that would actually explode purposefully in the exo-atmospheric environment, so outside of the atmosphere, but deploy such a large magnetic pulse that would effectively disable the entire American electrical grid. And so the current Outer Space Treaty and the Geneva Convention are being sort of violated on a literally hour-and-a-half basis by our adversaries. And so if we want to enforce some level of sort of democratic rule of law, sort of property rights, basic human rights on the surface of the moon, out in low Earth orbit, out in lunar orbit, eventually on the surface of Mars, the only way to guarantee that is we just have to be there first with the largest sort of presence. And so, I do think it's sort of incredibly sort of critical to set up sort of precedent sort of for these things, and then in particular, mineral rights on the moon are again in theory there's some sort of treaty set up for this. If the Chinese have a massive, sort of, mining operation on the moon, good luck, sort of, trying to define whatever, sort of mineral rights that you want. And realistically, as you're seeing the, sort of commercial space economy develop, it is largely being developed by private companies. I think almost certainly you'll see that the vast majority of the early mineral rights, on the moon are held by private corporations and individual persons, not necessarily, sort of by nations. And so, it's definitely something that's very sort of top of mind for sort of all things sort of outer space. Given that in some ways the whole point of going to space, or a decent chunk of it, is the mineral rights that are out there.
That's incredible. And I agree with you. The first movers, the builders of those new innovative technologies will create the rules. Just like the Web3 world, the rules there were created by Satoshi Nakamoto. A lot of builders that decided to remain anonymous because they want to bring the positive impact over to capitalize on those opportunities. And so now we have Elon Musk, who of course influenced the elections, so that I think his main goal was actually to make us interplanetary species. And this was the drive for him to further get involved into politics. And I think just like I am very excited with the new administration being pro-crypto, I think we probably share this passion and excitement, this administration to be also pro-space.
Yeah, I mean, not to so get too political on this, but it was always a little a lot of cognitive dissonance that I had in relation to the other campaign having this messaging of sort of hope and sort of progress, when outside of the occasional message of joy, the vast majority of their messaging was about how the other side was fascists, Hitler, and basically did deserve to stand behind the presidential seal. Versus, I would argue, I think this campaign did genuinely have sort of hope and progress, and around all these very specific areas, there was sort of clear articulation of being pro crypto, pro outer space exploration. There were so many things that they were pro and providing a compelling vision for the future that I'm very excited to sort of see realized. I can't wait till sort of Gary Gensler's out of office. I can't wait till the current NASA administrator. I think God bless. You think Gary and Bill Nelson can both go themselves. Maybe to articulate this, I haven't been able to say this on the record or publicly for like the past 4 years, because you have to deal with the fact that this person is still the current NASA administrator. But it gives you a sense of like who the prior administration was willing to appoint in some of like our some of the most critical areas of national security. The current NASA administrator is this guy Bill Nelson, who was formerly Senator Bill Nelson. At the time that he was a senator, he was on the appropriations committee that basically determined NASA's budget. He basically used the political influence that he had in that budgetary process to force himself onto a NASA space shuttle mission to the International Space Station. On a space shuttle mission. This was pre-International Space Station, so it was just the space shuttle on its own in space, and forced himself onto a mission, like as an elected official. Basically, obviously, sort of huge amounts of bribery and corruption that went into that to, get to be on a space shuttle mission. The astronauts were obviously deeply frustrated by this, because obviously all of them had gone through rigorous training, selection processes. It was very difficult to, sort of get into that caliber of, caliber of that program. And so his nickname, on the space shuttle mission by all the other astronauts was Ballast, in that he was a useless weight that they had to drag around that didn't, sort of really provide much value. That same politician then decided to use the photo that he had of himself in the astronaut suit and the fact that he was on those space shuttle missions to basically constantly campaign that he was an astronaut, which to me, again, I think, very morally reprehensible, especially compared to, sort of somebody like a Mark Kelly, who, while a Democrat and I might not agree with all his policies, at least genuinely was an astronaut. Like, he went through the training. He was up on the International Space Station for longer than any other human has ever had to be. Like, he went through some real, rigorous, sort of training and, some difficult, sort of personal journey. Deserves to get to run for Senate in Arizona as an astronaut. And so who did the Biden administration appoint as the NASA administrator? The guy who was nicknamed Ballast. And what has he been for NASA over the past 4 years? He's been a ballast. He has been a useless dead weight at the sort of top of the agency. And so you guys obviously see this in the world of crypto, but I see it in the world of space as well. We're just like, when you have these administrations that just cannot think about, technology accelerations, thinking about prioritizing the future, thinking about, sort of prioritizing the fact that, sort of the economy and capitalism and tech progress is what, defines our quality of life. You get into these scenarios where they put these terrible, terrible people at the tops of these administrations that have just like no clue what they're doing and are clearly just there to slow things, sort of down for sort of political reasons. And so, yeah, God bless Gary Gensler being gone, and God bless, Bill Nelson being gone.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've seen it a lot in our space, both in real estate and in crypto. Good to learn about the space. But now let's get back to Earth and talk about Miami. Probably not many people know that you were actually born in Bulgaria, and then you moved to Silicon Valley and then Miami. A path that is similar to mine, moving from Bulgaria to Palo Alto, and then 3 years ago to Miami. What was the hardest in this transition for you?
I think the only thing that was particularly difficult for me in the move to Miami was so purely on a personal level, where I think I was more hopeful that I had this very core group of friends in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I think I was more hopeful that more of them would recognize the ridiculousness of the like quality of life there, the local government, the insane sort of bureaucrats that were sort of shutting down outdoor dining when in the sort of winter of 2021 there was clearly no proof that there was sort of outdoor transmission of COVID, and it was clear that the sort of entire sort of reaction had been sort of way too severe. And I think the thing that was probably most difficult was it was unfortunate that of those 10 closest friends, 7 ended up still staying there. 2 moved to Austin, which I was like kind of disappointed by. I get why people sort of like Austin as a sort of metropolitan conservative immigrant that hates communism. I fit into Miami extremely well with all the Cubans that are here and everyone else that's around here.
Yeah.
I don't fit in as well as Texas. Like, I get why that's a different, sort of version of America. And I really, am proud of what they stand for, but I don't necessarily fit in there, nearly as much. And so, it was just disappointing to realize, man, of my 10 close friends, I'm really the only one, sort of moved here. And so, there are obviously people that I, care about spending a lot of time with. And that's just meant, sort of being on planes more. Other than that, the sort of move to Miami, in 2021 was actually, sort of quite easy in some ways. Part of why it was so easy was I recognized that professionally, I actually had no portfolio companies in the Bay Area anymore at that point. They were spread out between LA, New York, Miami, and Europe. And so there was no necessarily sort of reason for me to be there. My colleagues were no longer at the time, at least going into the office, in San Francisco anyway. So I was like, what's the point of me being in that office as somebody who cares about, sort of working there, sort of day to day. And then, there's obviously this massive cultural draw where it's I love my Mediterranean food. I love people that, sort of hate communism. I love, people that are willing to, sit on both sides of the aisle and actually have a rational discussion and not, sort of vilify both sides. And, Miami is one of the only, truly, although, well, maybe with, this week's election, maybe there are a lot more purple cosmopolitan cities, but at the time it felt like Miami was the only place that at least straddled close to 50-50. Now I'm sure with the, sort of election results, hell, even New Jersey at this point is 50-50. So, maybe there's, more towns that resemble this, but at the time, there really wasn't, anywhere else in the United States that I felt like was tolerant of both sides. I wore a MAGA hat in San Francisco for a month straight in January 2020, and people looked at me like I was a murderer or something like that, versus obviously wearing the MAGA hat here. Yeah, you maybe occasionally got looks in 2021, but not much. And then obviously
now they understand you.
Totally. Now I think you can wear a MAGA hat anywhere. I am waiting on I want to pull up that old January 2020 tweet, and sort of gloat about it a little bit. Where I think I was at least somewhat sort of ahead of the curve of comfort with the sort of what I think is a pretty sort of promising and optimistic sort of campaign slogan. But at the time I was literally called a Nazi for wanting to make America great again. So. Fun to see how the world changes.
Well, I remember those days in California. I remember that. And yeah. Well,
thankfully, by the way, in relation to sort of California, San Francisco, this week basically, sweeped out all of the crazy leftists out of the local, sort of city supervisors. And so, now it's not to say that the city is immediately going to turn around, but London Breed, the crazy mayor, is out. All the crazy city supervisors that are the ones that actually, sort of run the city are all out. This guy, George Gascon, who was previously the San Francisco DA, he was run out of San Francisco because he was too crazy liberal, which again, in San Francisco, it's like almost impossible to get run out of a city for being too crazy liberal. And he somehow uses that to then get promoted into the Los Angeles district attorney. Anyways, thank God Gary Gascon also lost his race, by the way, 63% to like 37%. So he lost it by like a mile. And so, anyways, it's like really exciting to see the fact that, like, unfortunately, Gavin Newsom's still the, sort of governor of, sort of California. And I always use a joke if, like, they ever appoint a Republican governor back in California, I'll happily, sort of move back. But at least you're seeing, sort of at the bottom up, some reversion to, sort of normality. And so, I don't know. I hope that we looked at the entire 2016 to 2024 period as like this weird delusion that America went through where, like, just the insane, sort of backlash
As a reset that we probably the city needed.
Yeah, and in some ways, you kind of go back to effectively, it was like the Obamas and the Clintons that basically caused all this. They went on this like crazy, sort of witch hunt campaign, convinced the entire nation that this like sort of person coming into office was going to be this like fascist, sort of dictator. They got the entire mainstream media spun off on it, and so then because of that, you also had all these local politicians that felt like they had to represent that movement, and so like San Francisco politics in 2015 were like, yeah, it was like a little liberal, but like it wasn't like that, sort of crazy. You could have like a reasonable quality of life. The moment that Trump got elected, everybody lost their minds because everybody was trying to show that they were as far left as possible, were as deep in the ideology. While the Me Too movement, obviously you had people like Harvey Weinstein, et cetera, that were insane. Clearly that movement went too far when like Aziz Ansari just got like an awkward blowjob. He got canceled, like, from the entire industry for like a woman that marginally regretted a blowjob. It's like, that's probably not like a reasonable reason to like, cancel somebody's entire career. So like things obviously got, sort of too far out of hand. COVID probably slowed down the reset. God bless the fact that, finally it seems like we're back to, sort of some level of normalcy. And then even our current, sort of vice president-elect, I think, sort of represented this quite well, even the weeks, leading up to the election. He was like, look, no matter who wins, no matter who loses, we need to, sort of accept the fact that we're a United States of America, and like we need to embrace everybody from all, sort of political lenses. And so, God bless that the, sort of crazy, sort of wokeness and the, sort of Hamas supporters, probably all going to get deported, and, the rest of us can, sort of be relatively indicated.
I agree with you that it deserves applause. I totally agree with you in regards to this huge difference in lifestyle between San Francisco, the city, and Miami, the city. I love all my friends in California, the hiking opportunities. I love the Peninsula, Palo Alto lifestyle, but the city itself, what a difference, a radical difference in terms of security and all those things.
And it's really depressing to see that over the course of the time that I've been there. Like, I moved to San Francisco in the summer of 2012. In the summer of 2012, San Francisco at the time basically still did not really have a tech ecosystem. It was still all in Palo Alto, Mountain View, etc. The first, like, crazy founders that went and moved their companies up there were Travis Kalanick with Uber and Jack Dorsey from Square. That was basically it. There was barely anybody else. And so everybody thought it was crazy to, like, live up there. There was no way you could have a real tech sort of job there. You fast forward 3 or 4 years later, it was the behemoth, right? Uber was a massive company. Square was a massive company. Everybody was moving their, like, primary offices.
Salesforce building.
Totally. Salesforce, like, moving from, sort of South Bay up to there. Google opening up all these, like, basically skyscrapers in San Francisco. I just remember in 2015 in San Francisco being like, oh my God, we took it from this, like, kind of suburb. Like, it wasn't really clear, like, how this was going to scale into, like, a massive industry when, like, you were stuck in, like, the South Bay suburbs. To all of a sudden you saw this, it was like, oh my God, skyscrapers getting built everywhere. Like, clearly this is going to be this tech utopia. I remember in, sort of summer of 2017, I was working for this guy, Keith Raboy, that, is currently a Miami resident and part of why I moved down here. And I remember, he probably at the time had like 13 or 14, sort of board seats at various companies. 10 or 11 of those 13 companies were all in like the Soma area. And so I remember being his chief of staff, like, walking around carrying his bags and like, taking notes, etc. But like, he would get it like stopped on the street like every literally 30 feet when we would walk to various sort of buildings in Soma. And it would be like Max Levchin, Jack Dorsey, Jim Getz, Alfred Lin, like the gods of Silicon Valley, literally were all so deep in the same ecosystem, in the same area, that there was this like spontaneous interaction. And then you fast forward to like, I went back and visited like, sort of, I want to say this like late 23, and you walk around Soma and it's just decrepit. It's empty. And it's just like this insane thing to think about, like, how did we take this place that I genuinely think could have been a massive, like, it could have been the Singapore, the Dubai of sort of America, of just this like sort of massive financial center, technological center, just startup center. And again, it's not to say that there's nothing going on there now. Clearly, AI created some sort of resurgence, but like it's so disappointing to imagine what could have been, and I don't think it can ever go back. Is like the unfortunate thing. It's just like at this point, so many of the sort of people that were the leaders of that ecosystem have now departed to Los Angeles, to New York, to Miami. You're just never going to be able to get the same concentration that you had in that like 2016, 17 timeframe that could have stuck around, and you could have kept those network effects there if the local government had been willing to not be just sort of insane on so many different aspects of quality of life, crime, and sort of an unwillingness to build that made it so it was totally untenable. Like when I moved to San Francisco in 2012, in that summer, I had a $1,000 a month rent. It was a shitty place. I literally lived in like a bunk bed and like a shared room. Like it wasn't great. But like I could afford to be there as like a super broke 19-year-old, like basically barely was making any money. You fast forward to that equivalent rent in 2019, it was like your bare minimum rent even for like a shared room was like above $2,000, and it's just like you just can't afford that when it's like your sort of first thing sort of out of college, or like it basically means you can't take these like more risky opportunities of like starting your own company where you can't guarantee your own salary, and so it's so disappointing to see that sort of degradation.
Yeah, I moved to Silicon Valley, not to San Francisco, but of course I experienced the city in late 2015 at the peak of the growth you just described. And I feel like Miami got this peak 2 years ago when we all moved here. And the momentum is, of course, a little bit lost, right? It plateaued somewhat. But then this year we're seeing so many amazing buildings getting permits and announced. Peter Thiel famously said that the VC money in the Bay Area and from all the startups, the IPO companies, all those funds are going to landlords and urban slumlords. How do you see Miami and Florida redefining the tech and the VC community here locally compared to Silicon Valley, and where are the money flowing here in the region?
Yeah, I mean, you can just see that in Miami, you don't have those same, sort of facts of like, yes, for sure, sort of some of the sort of single family homes that are obviously have significantly increased in price, but you actually see, and obviously this stuff doesn't happen on a dime, but you see some loosening of the, sort of demand because of this massive increase in supply. I think it was something like the Wynwood area, over the sort of past 12 months, the next 12 months is expected to open up 40,000 units. That's basically more units than the entire San Francisco city has opened up over the past decade, not just one sort of neighborhood in Miami. And so I think you're seeing it flow towards the actual sort of companies and the sort of individual employees rather than that being directly sort of sent back to landlords. And so yeah, while I do think there's a bit of a plateau in 23, I do see this resurgence in momentum in 24, where like it's just clear there's a set of late stage companies that have decided to relocate their HQs here. You have companies like Sam Altman's Exowatt, which is like his first basically sort of private investment since the sort of OpenAI sort of board sort of back and forth. Is now over 100 people basically all in like the sort of Wynwood area, sort of performing quite well. And so there is just this like set of companies that clearly are sort of very much entrenched and here to stay. We had some of the early sort of winners from the earlier time period in 2021 that we unfortunately churned out. We have a portfolio company, Traba, that ultimately ended up sort of deciding to relocate to New York because they couldn't quite find the engineering talent. The sort of counterintuitive answer has been actually the companies that have been able to succeed here the most have actually not been the traditional like SaaS software companies. It's been like biotech, med devices, and like hardware engineers, partially because you can pull from like Nextera in Orlando, you can pull from the med device scene here. And so I think, both like crypto obviously had its up and downs, sort of in Miami, SaaS and marketplaces had their ups and downs, but the clear area that feels like it's sort of compounding and up and to the right are in some of these things that aren't just like pure sort of software plays that at least the CEOs that I'm speaking to, have a much easier time recruiting very broad teams here in Miami relative to like the SaaS guys, struggled a bit, with that here.
Awesome. Okay, we are running out of time. Final words, some shout outs to about your favorite companies, especially those that are founded in Bulgaria.
Yeah, I guess I was mentioning to Natalia that I'm heading to sort of Bulgaria in 2 weeks to check out this company, Endurosat. They're actually now one of the largest satellite producers in all of Europe, and they're headquartered in Bulgaria. And you very much have this like John Galt, sort of Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged, sort of parallels and visions whenever I walk into their office, because like half their team is a bunch of Bulgarians that are locally trained, etc., way cheaper than we can find anywhere else in the world, and way more technical, but half are a bunch of like extremely experienced, competent, like Italian, German, sort of French engineers. And when you talk to them, and we were like, "Why are you living in like Sofia, Bulgaria, and like moved here from Paris?" And the like resounding answer is like, France has fallen and become a socialist regime. You can't actually make any money there. Bulgaria still believes in like some personal property rights and like the sort of right to freedom. And so even though in theory my like salary is quote unquote lower, if I look at it on a quality of life basis, if I extrapolate out how much wealth I'm going to be able to generate over the coming decade, I feel much better about my ability to do that here. And so thankfully in the United States we had a repudiation of socialism and communism sort of this week. I don't think we've quite seen the same in sort of Europe over the past sort of year or so. But at the very least, we have some strongholds in Eastern Europe that sort of still have the vestiges of the fall of the Soviet Union closely in their memory. And so I think you'll see that if you extrapolate the United Kingdom's GDP per capita and Poland's GDP per capita, you'll see a flip over of that over the course of the next decade, which is insane to say. And a part of that is just UK has stagnated for the past decade, and I don't see why they won't stagnate for the next. And sort of Poland is consistently up on the right as well as the rest of Eastern Europe. But yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Dylan. Thanks.